Great. Hey, men of CA, how's it going? For those of you guys that don't know us, my name is Marvin, one of the pastors on staff, and I'm with Ralph Delgado, another one of our excellent pastors. And so we wanted to talk in more depth about the conversation that we had a few weeks back at the men's gathering. Guys, you might remember Mark talked to us about pre-deciding certain areas of our lives. And so what I'm going to do is a four-part series where I'm going to interview or talk with someone who I feel is doing really well in one of those four areas. And so the first one that Mark mentioned is we've had to pre-decide on how do we use our time. And I remember the line that he used that night was, we can always make more money, but we can't make more time. And that line has stuck with me, Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
And you're someone that I look up to and admire in terms of the way you go about organizing your life and especially your time and schedule. And so I don't know if I've had you had some thoughts, but what would you want to say to the guys about how we can pre-decide with our
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. Thanks, Marvin. For me, the way I manage my time started several years ago when I attended a seminar. I don't remember if it was Stephen Covey or John Maxwell, but they gave an example at the seminar where the speaker came in and he had a small table, and on the table he had a pile of fist-sized rocks and then a smaller pile or another pile of smaller rocks, and then he had a bucket of sand. And he gave this great example where he poured the sand into a jar like this, and then he tried to put all the rocks into the jar, and they wouldn't fit. So he pulled them out, and then he put the rocks in first, the biggest ones, and then the next biggest ones, and then the sand, and it all fit. And the reason he used that example is he was trying to teach us that with our time, with our finite time, we have to take care of the big rocks first. So for me, some of the big rocks are my spiritual formation and development. So I always first, before I plan for anything, I plan for my devotional time, for that time where I get to spend with God, either prayer, reading the Bible, I do journaling. So that has become very important to me, and I always put that on my schedule. Time with family could be another big rock. So for a lot of you guys that are in relationships, you're married, you have kids, that would be a big rock. And so again, because time is like money, it's so finite. Managing your time is like budgeting your money. And so I always make sure that my wife, next to God, is the next big rock that I think about when I look at my schedule and the allotted time that I have. And then it's my kids. And for me, I have grandkids. So those are the big rocks in my life. I put those into my finite jar first, and then I plan everything else around that.
So, I mean, it's really cool to me to hear you say that you actually schedule time with God. I'm not as good about doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
I make that a regular rhythm, but you actually build that into your calendar.
Yeah, I have found that my calendar is my best friend.
Mm.
It's become such a great tool for me. I put everything on there. I put my reading on there. And it sounds a little bit tedious, but once you get into the rhythm of using your calendar,
Hmm.
it just becomes second nature. So I put my free time on my calendar. I put time with my wife on my calendar. And again, it might sound like, well, that sounds really rigid. And of course, I'm flexible and
Yeah.
I allow things to change that. But I have found that if I don't plan out my week or my month, I will get overrun by just busyness.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you fight the temptation to give that time away? Because I've done that where I schedule reading time on a Friday morning or something, and then
Yeah.
sure enough, someone will ask for an appointment or there's something that comes up precisely at that time. And my first temptation is to say, well, I can reschedule my reading time.
Yeah.
How do you balance that when do you decide when is it okay to reprioritize or when is it
Yeah.
like I'm going to stick to this boundary?
Yeah, that's a Marvin. Such a great question, and I want to just say to you and to the guys, I'm not always 100% successful at sticking to my plan because like I said, I've learned to be flexible, but I've also learned how to say no.
Hmm.
And so when I know what's most important, God, wife, kids, career and job is four or five for me. If a four or a five tries to usurp a one or a two,
Mm.
then I know to say no. And I have found people are really understanding. If somebody calls and wants to meet with me or something comes up, I have to weigh out is this a really big priority where I have to drop everything to be with them, or can I say to them, Joe, I can't meet with you today, but I can meet with you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Will that work for you? So I've just learned to set boundaries and take care of the big rocks.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful to hear you talk about the 1, 2, 3, 4, and how you start placing those
Yeah.
rocks in first, and then you add in all of the other stuff, the
Yes.
sand that fills up our time.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time. Which one of those rocks represents your viewing of Dodgers baseball?
Well, I will tell you, when I was younger, Dodger baseball was a big, big rock for me. But as I've gotten older, I just realized, like I said, time is so finite. I still love sports. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
watching the Dodgers. I love watching football. But I recognize it's more important for me to do some other things.
sure.
So I'd say Dodgers and sports have become sand for
Oh
me.
man, except when they're in the playoffs.
Except when they're in the playoffs, then they become a bigger rock.
Sean Strova, sorry, we don't mean to offend you if you're
Yeah,
watching this.
absolutely. Yeah,
Well, thanks for your time, Ralph.
of
I
course.
appreciate you
It was
being
on
here.
my calendar.
Oh, good. I
You
appreciate you talking to the guys about that and
bet.
really helping us pre-decide how we're going to best invest this
Yeah.
amazing resource that God has given us, and that's our time.
Yeah.
So,
I just a closing thought. I think I have learned and recognized that when I get to the end of my life, one of the things I will give account for is how did I utilize the finite gift of time
yeah,
that God gave me?
yeah, that's good.
How did I utilize that? So
That's good. Well, guys, thanks for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope there's some practical little nugget that you got out of this today. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be doing the other three components of what Mark talked about. So stay tuned.